So I'll try and summarize those two main ideas for you to kick this off. I think Bitcoin is the hardest money because the supply growth rate of Bitcoin is the lowest of any money that has ever existed, any money that we've ever had. So currently, Bitcoin's supply, starting from last May, has dropped to about 0.8% per year. We've basically never had a form of money that increased at this kind of supply growth rate before. Gold used to be the money that was used all over the world up until about 100 years ago because it is the hardest money to make, it's the hardest commodity, and so the supply for it only grows at around 1.5% to 2% per year. And that was where Bitcoin was up until a few months ago. Now Bitcoin's growth rate dropped by half, so the supply growth rate now is already the lowest that it has ever been, and we're very sure of it. For 15 years, nobody has managed to mess with this supply growth rate, and you can be as sure as possible, I would say, of anything, that nobody's going to be able to change this supply growth rate going into the future, which is a kind of assurance that you do not have with other kinds of things. You don't know what kind of supply growth rate the forms of money that are issued by people, like government money, are going to take over the future, but it's generally a lot higher. So it used to be that everybody used to use gold, and gold grew at around 2%. Then we moved to government money, and government money grows at around 14% per year on average over the last 60 years. So that's what the supply growth rate is like on average. Now that includes the better currencies like the euro, the dollar, the Swiss franc. They grow at around 7, 8, 9% per year. And then it includes, the basket cases that sometimes have something like 50%, 100%, 300% growth per year. But you come out to an average user experience of 14%, which means you lose half of your purchasing power in 5 years if you just hold on to cash.
투자의 대가들은 항상 말합니다. 화폐는 종이 쪼가리일 뿐이고 화폐는 들고 있으면 매년 가치가 떨어지기 때문에 가격이 오르는 자산을 사야 한다고 말합니다. 이 사실과 원리는 어떤 사람도 부정할 수 없을 겁니다. 역사가 증거이기 때문이죠. 그렇다면 과연 투자를 해서 돈을 버는 사람이 많을까요? 아이러니하게도 투자를 해서 돈을 잃는 사람의 비율이 훨씬 많죠. 투자는 공부를 하면 할수록 엄청난 무기가 되지만 공부를 하지 않고 하는 투자는 현금을 들고 있는 것보다 못하다고 생각합니다. 사이페딘아모스는 경제학자이자 성과 좋은 유명한 투자자입니다. 그의 말을 들어보면서 투자로 어떻게 하면 돈을 벌 수 있는지 살펴보죠.
So effectively, fiat money has destroyed humanity's ability to save reliably. Instead of having the ability to save value into the future, you need to take risk with the money that you've already worked for. And so effectively, you need to have another job as an investor just to keep the value of the money that you've earned from your actual work. And so that now is changed because Bitcoin is available. And so you don't have to play that game where you are playing with casino chips. You're gambling with casino chips that are dropping in value. So you need to be constantly winning just to stay flat. You can opt out of this kind of stupid casino that is built to rob you and join a game that is not built to rob you, wherein you just hold a fraction of Bitcoin, a fixed fraction of the supply of Bitcoin that continuously holds on to its value over time because nobody can make more of it and most likely appreciates. So having this form of money available everybody in the world, I think is going to be enormously consequential. And on the other hand, if you look at the use of fiat money replaced gold because effectively governments could do it. They could put gold out of business because they could control central banks and they could make the central banks use fiat money. But that ultimately relies on credit and it relies on trust, which is effectively a human manual technology. Ultimately, you're counting on a bunch of people to wake up every morning and not mess up your money for you, which is a little bit like what it was like when you used to have to call an operator in order to connect your telephone. Some of you might be old enough to remember this. I do. Back in the day, sometimes you couldn't just dial the phone. You picked up the phone, somebody answered, and you told them who you wanted to talk to, and then he would connect you to somebody. And sometimes it would work, sometimes it didn't. Then we figured out a way to do that, so there's just technology where you press a bunch of buttons and then the other person his phone rings and then you talk to him. And it's, of course, a lot more scalable.
구독자분들을 위해서 10년 경력 개발자 출신 트레이더와 프롬프트 엔지니어가 같이 만든 앤드류 트레이딩 팀 알파빗 오토프로 지표 무료 신청을 오픈했습니다. 현재 유료로 팔고 있는 그만큼 가치 있는 지표이지만 구독자분들 성원에 힘입어 저 또한 도움을 받고 있기 때문에 고민 끝에 선착순 50명만 신청제로 받기로 했습니다. 초보자분들부터 경력이 오래된 트레이더분들까지 굉장히 큰 도움을 받을 수 있는 지표라 도움이 되실 거라고 자부합니다. 또한 실제로 사용해보고 사용 후기까지 적어주시는 분들 5명을 선별해서 알파빗 오토프로 지표 평생 이용권을 드리려고 합니다. 신청 방법은 하단 더보기란에 나와 있으니 많은 신청 부탁드립니다.
And this is effectively what Bitcoin does. This is how it improves over fiat. Fiat, as a form of money, had managed to improve over gold effectively by allowing people to spend it and send it internationally. But that was only done through relying on trusting in individuals. It was only done through relying on people turning up and doing that job and doing it honestly. And after 100 years, I think we have a very reliable track record to show that they haven't done it in a very honest way. I think phone operators were a lot more honest because there was not a lot of money to be made from messing up your phone calls, but there is a lot of money to be made from messing up your money. And so therefore, there is a strong incentive for it. And now you can opt out. So I think there is a much stronger imperative for using automated money than using automated phone calls. If I was given the choice, I'll take an operator and get to keep the automatic money. I think it's much more reliable because it gets rid of the element of trust. And this is the truly remarkable thing about Bitcoin and why Bitcoin is such a mind-blowing technology and why I believe it's completely unique as a form of money in that it does not rely on other people for it to operate. It operates completely based on math, on the rules of math. There's an algorithm that controls the supply, it controls the payment clearance. If you have the private key, you can move the coins. You don't have the private key, you can't move the coins. It's completely free from human intervention. There is no admin. There is no person that you can appeal to. There's no customer service. There's no CEO. There's nobody that the government can put a gun to and force to change the way that Bitcoin works. Bitcoin just continuously exists and makes itself available for everybody around the world to use it while it continues to be what I believe the best money ever. So it's faster than fiat, more reliable than fiat, and it is harder than gold. And I think the implication that we can go back to a hard money, I think is enormous, because if you look at the world in the 19th century, you see that people had a much higher rate of saving back then than they did in the 20th century, where everybody was relying on debt. And the reason for that is because the value of money is constantly declining in the 20th century. And so, therefore, it makes no sense to save. On the other hand, it makes more sense to borrow. So as a result, everybody, as an individual and as a society, becomes effectively a debt slave. And that includes corporations, it includes governments. Everybody has to be running on debt, and everybody is a couple of paychecks away from liquidation because you have to be in debt, and so you have to be making your payments. And if you're not in debt, effectively you're losing value, you're subsidizing the other people that are in debt. All of that is essentially possible to overcome when we move to a form of money that is hard, that prevents anyone from printing more of it, that prevents anybody from creating more of the supply. And the flip side of this is, okay, well, if that wealth isn't being stolen from everybody, well, then who's not getting it? And this is the fun part. This is the best part of the whole thing. It's not just that you get to keep your money. It's that the people who don't get to have your money are the people that have done all kinds of horrible things over the last century with your money, namely governments. They have had a blank check to spend. As long as their currency works, they can effectively spend as much as they want. There's no sane limit on how much they can spend. They don't have to face economic calculation on their decisions because they don't bear the cost. There is no bureaucrat who has to pay from his own pocket if he makes a mistake. There's a money printer that's out there that bails all of their decisions out. And that just encourages all of these horrible decisions, encourages all kinds of recklessness with the lives of people, with the money that people have, and encourages all kinds of terrible things to take place all over the world. We see it in the 20th century. We see how much wars there were. We saw how much death happened in the 20th century. All of it was financed by governments who were printing money. When governments had to fight wars while securing physical gold, which they could not print, and because that was money, they could only fight until their physical gold ran out. So they became a lot more responsible, because if you run out of gold, you can't pay your soldiers anymore. You no longer have an army. So they were far more responsible with how they treated it. When we move to a world in which the money is constantly losing its value and constantly therefore being used to finance government spending on war, now a government faces an entirely different perspective on the issue. Now they can actually they can fight for as long as anybody out there is holding on to their money. As long as anybody is using their money, they can print more of that money that devalues that money, that allows them to continue to fight. And that's how war has just become so normalized, because people don't even realize that they're paying for it. They don't realize that the value of the prices of things that you buy in the supermarket is going up because the supply of money is increasing, not because shampoo or houses or cars or apples or oranges are becoming more expensive. We're making more of those things every year. They're becoming cheaper in real terms. We have more and more of them. They're not getting more expensive in real terms. It's the money that is getting cheaper, and the money is getting cheaper because that money is being printed to finance all kinds of insane forms of government spending and all kinds of local corruption. And that is what leads to all kinds of destruction. So Bitcoin effectively offers us a way out of this, offers us a way that we can all, anywhere, anyone in the world, can opt out of whatever insanity the government is doing and secure their own wealth, and in the process rob the government of continuing to have more resources available for it in order to produce all of these horrible things that we see around the world. And this is something that works everywhere. It works in rich countries, it works in poor countries, it works if you have hyperinflation, it works if you have high inflation, it works if you have low inflation, it works even if you don't have inflation hypothetically, because it is just a superior form of money whose supply increases a lot less over time. So it holds on to its value a lot more, and it incentivizes people to think about the future more and more. I think one interesting aspect that I like to discuss is how it shapes people's orientation towards the future. When the money is good, people are able to save for the future, people are able to provide for themselves, and because they're able to provide for themselves in the future, they start thinking more about the future, and they become more future-oriented. Whereas when their money is broken and they can't save for the future becomes less certain for them,